Alleluia. 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 Christ took away our infirmities and bore our diseases. Alleluia. 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 The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came forward. Seeing him, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please come lay your hands on her. She may get well and live." He went off with him, and a large crowd followed him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet she was not helped, but only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid. Have faith." He did not allow anyone to come to accompany him inside, except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to them, "Why this commotion, weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The girl, a child of 12, arose immediately and walked around. At that they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and that she should be given something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord. Today is the feast of St. John Bosco. St. John Bosco lived in the 1800s in Turin, Italy. It's the same Turin where the Shroud of Turin is housed, right? And St. John Bosco was a priest in the 1800s, and he's known for many miracles that he was able to perform. He basically had kind of like an angelic dog that would appear to protect him when he was in danger. Turin in those days was not the nicest city to live in. He was also famous for other miracles. He was able to multiply hosts for communion. There's stories said about when he was having Mass and they didn't have enough hosts for communion. Miraculously, the host continued until everybody had received communion. He was also a man who had many different dreams, and he was able to heal people. So a very interesting person to read about. One of the things that I love about St. John Bosco was his ministry. He founded the Salesian Order, which is named for St. Francis de Sales. And how that came about was St. John Bosco, as he was finishing seminary, he realized that there were many youth in the city of Turin, especially boys, right, who were going wayward in their paths. This was right around the time of the Industrial Revolution, and so many of the boys who were living in Turin, they were orphans or they were criminals. And so he began to minister among the young boys of Turin. And something that's very interesting about how he ministered to them was, instead of treating them like everybody else did, And he developed his own way of ministering to them. St. John Bosco, primarily, he used kindness and called them to a higher responsibility. St. John Bosco, much like Jesus, right, as we read in the Gospels, Jesus is talking to tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners. And it wasn't just that he accepted them, it was that Jesus had this way of seeing to their souls and bringing the greatness out of them, the very best of themselves. Jesus was able to draw out of people. And that's what St. John Bosco did with these young boys. He called them to a higher life. He called them to virtue. He treated them with dignity and respect, not in the ways that we talk about in our modern culture today, where we call respect basically just leaving each other alone. St. John Bosco did not do that. He called them out for their shortcomings and their sins, but all in such a way to reveal to them their true potential, their inner goodness and strength. When he would come across criminal boys, he would say things to them like, "Is that how you are going to use your power?" He was always calling them on. He treated them with great seriousness. I think there's a lot that we can learn from this method of St. John Bosco. Sometimes we think our role in helping others is fraternal correction, calling them out for their sins and their shortcomings. But I think the method of St. John Bosco tended to be much more successful. It wasn't so much a focus on their need to change. It was rather a focus on their own desires within them, that they wanted to be virtuous and strong and sacrificial. But they needed somebody to see that within them and call it out of them. It's a great spiritual gift that we should be praying for when we talk to our friends or families or fellow parishioners. God, give me the gift to see their inner strength and to draw it out of them. This is the charism of St. John Bosco, and I think it would be a great charism for each of us to pray for as well.